Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years. Pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. This week on the podcast, my friend Hannah Teutscher is talking about training people to teach movement. Now, Hannah, while being a yoga teacher and practitioner, as well as a former dancer, is primarily a Pilates instructor and owns a Pilates studio with her husband in Nuremberg, Germany. Here is what I love about talking with colleagues and friends in adjacent industries to ours. We get to see what is similar about our industry, which helps us not feel so isolated, and also get to notice what's different. Well, it turns out that Pilates and yoga have quite a lot in common. And honestly, best practices for training people to teach something can run across multiple disciplines. Hannah and I talk about this a lot on this podcast episode, and I think you're going to love her perspective. But before we get into this conversation, there's something I want to bring your awareness to. There's a woman, Taylor Casey, who went to the Shivananda Yoga Retreat Center in the Bahamas last month in June 2024 and disappeared from her yoga teacher training program. The retreat center has not been helpful to her family, and neither have the local authorities in the Bahamas. So I wanted to spread the word about Taylor and her family, who are working hard to get the word out about their missing loved one. So please go to Instagram and follow at FindTaylorCasey to get updates and to find the link tree in their bio to donate and support. And if, by chance, you happen to have connections at the Shivananda Retreat Center in the Bahamas, all the better. Please contact them and find out what they're doing. Hold their feet to the fire and help Taylor's family find answers. Yoga is our practice as well as our business, and we need to support all of us who are out there working in yoga. Also, thank you to our new podcast sponsor, Midwest Yoga Conference, an event run by Midwest Yoga Magazine. We are meeting together in October in Des Moines, Iowa for the Iowa Midwest Yoga Conference, and you'll see me, Zaria Rochester, Coley Sanders, and Amy Zelmer there. All these women have been on the podcast, so go snag their episodes in our archives, especially Colese's. She's keynoting this event, and listen to their wisdom. Find links for the event at www.midwestyogaconference.com or check out our show notes. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the training yoga teachers conversation with Hannah Teutscher. Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, so I've said this on the podcast many times, but one of my favorite things about the podcast is it's an excuse for me to talk to my friends. So I have one of those people on the podcast today, Hannah Teutscher. Can you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you. I love chatting with you, and I love everything that you do on this podcast. So, my name is Hannah. I am a former professional dancer. I am a longtime yogi, so Ashtanga yoga since 2000, which is a long time at this point. And I teach Pilates, and I am the host of a different podcast called The Pilates Exchange. I own an online studio plus a brick and mortar in Nuremberg, Germany, which is where I am talking to you from right today.
Okay, so Hannah, your interview is part of a series that we're talking about for yoga teacher training programs. Yes. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because you've had a program in the past called Train the Trainer. You've done a lot of thought work around how we train people and how we train other teachers specifically. And I want to have that conversation. And I also want to talk to you about what it is to be a trainer and host a brick and mortar studio. Because as I said before I hit record, I think one of the biggest misconceptions we have in this industry is that everybody who owns a brick and mortar and trains because their business model isn't working and they have to make money in order to keep their doors open. And that's like such bullshit that I just want to actually get other owners on the podcast so we can talk about this. Thoughts?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think if you, um, this is what I'm going to say is going to sound very harsh. I think if you cannot pay your bills as a brick and mortar, then you need to work on your business model. You do not need
Yes.
to start a teacher training program, because then what you're going to do is transfer all of these bad ideas about business, about the yoga business, Pilates, whatever business it is, you're going to transfer those ideas into your teacher training. And what you're doing is you are poisoning the entire system, because then people believe once they get out of teacher training that they cannot make money, or they do not know how to make money from the industry that you just taught them to teach in, which is really bad. My opinion.
The end. That's all we need to say.
Yeah.
I mean, because honestly, that's so true, and it's crazy this idea that people who don't have like strong, stable business models in their businesses are then training other people on how to make money in this industry. Like the first thing I taught people when I started training folks was the first thing I'm going to do is teach you how to make your money back. Like
Yeah.
and people don't come into training thinking, oh, I have to make this money back. I'm like, why not?
Right. Right. Like I want to know, like that's what we're talking about all the time, is like if you don't have the basics, and I mean not everyone has the basics of business. They haven't learned that. I didn't know anything about business when I started my studio. I had to learn everything, and it is it's a lot of information. There's a lot of failing that goes into the learning. And if you aren't successful, or even just stable, if you're not a stable studio, then you really shouldn't be grabbing at another thing to try to fill the space to make more money. What it means is that your system is broken. Go back from the very beginning, get some coaching, get some mentoring. There's a lot of people out there that do it actually very well, and figure out what's the broken part of that. And then later, maybe put in some teacher training once you've figured that out. But it's not the go-to to put a band-aid on a broken model.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about the math too behind this because I know
Yeah.
you do privates and you have clients and all those kind of things, as do I as a yoga therapist. And like the training portion, there's this myth that it's quite profitable. And I'm like, see, I can like my breakdown is I make so much more money when I see just a regular client one-on-one than I'm ever going to make with all of the hours and the prep work that we do to train people. And have you found that too?
I found that too. And in the current model that I have, when I'm doing teacher training, I am so hands-on mentorship type of training that I'm doing it for the love of what mentoring a teacher into my business, basically, because I want them to teach for me. I'm not making good money from this. I'm actually, if anything, I'm losing money from the time and the effort of the materials that I'm putting in, the photo shoots, the videos, like all of the stuff, the workbooks,
Oh my
it's
God, all the stuff.
all the stuff of updating your information. For us, it's like making sure that it's science-based, all the things to not just replicate someone else's business. The thought work that goes in behind it means that it's not a financial model of gaining anything for me, really, financially.
Okay, so do you find the reason why you train is because you need people to work for you? Because I think overwhelmingly within the yoga industry, that's why studios train.
I see, I have like two different yes. Yes, is because we need better educated teachers for us. And I would rather put the time in, though it'd be a lot of time unpaid, to train people in the values the method that I've created over the years. So yes, I train my trainers. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if we're doing a math problem, the thing that I want to solve for x for is how do we make that not the case? Because that feels insane to me that that is the vast majority of people's experiences, right? Is like they're starting, and there's a yoga studio owners group on Facebook that I asked this question to last fall. And I would say about 70% of the people were like, I train because I need people who teach my style of yoga. I need people who actually are good at their jobs versus just, the kind of mills that we chug teachers out of.
Yeah.
How do we make that better? Because I would rather spend my time doing something else, honestly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah. You know what, Rebecca? It's like this. At least what my experience has been, and of course, there's always exceptions to everything. So, but generally, the teachers that we've seen have been very watered down. There's no authenticity that's there. They don't feel like they can command a room when they're teaching, or to pivot if something is not going the way that they have been taught to do. They, it's a very cookie cutter. So that's not what I need. And I think the problem is then really in these sort of cookie cutter types of big brands that put out tons of teachers because it lacks the it lacks a lot of elements.
It lacks everything good.
Well, I mean, like our answer to that originally was to Christian and I created a program called Train the Trainers, and it was to answer exactly this problem: is that our what we were finding was that there are teachers there, they have a certification, but they don't feel like they can teach. So one of the things is that there's not enough teaching time that's being observed and mentored in that period. So what we do is we mentor people through, how's our cueing, the authenticity, how is the use of your voice in the room, what does our body language look like, if you're going to use tactile cues, how can you do that better, like all the things, structuring. So all those little things that I think are being uh, overpassed in the traditional teacher training programs, yoga teacher training, Pilates, it's all the same, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. And so I've talked a lot about on this podcast what is called pedagogy, like how you teach people how to teach something. And I find that is the conversation we feel like we're missing.
Yeah.
Like, I find it that there's something to, and there's been now, so you were a former professional dancer. I did theater all through life. I had Deb Flashenberg, she was a theater major. Harriet McAtee was on there. She was also in theater. Like, there's an element of performance, of being able to, like you say, command a room, that I think we all got trained in because of this other thing that we did in our lives. So then you walk into a space and you're like, well, I know how to run this. Like, this
Yeah.
is just a small version of that. But how do we train other people how to do that in like a yoga space or Pilates space?
Yeah. Well, I think that's such a great question. And I'm in a future podcast. It's funny, it's on my list of things to do, is to talk about the performative nature of commanding a room. And being that comes really natural to me, the big question that I had at the very beginning when I started mentoring other teachers was, is it necessary for me to teach them how to perform? Or can I find a way to help people lean into the authenticity of who they are in that type? Like, I don't want it, not everyone is a performer. I'm a performer. I
Same. Yeah.
so that's my happy place. But I understand that's not everyone, and nor does it need to be. But understanding that you have a responsibility of, even if it's not performative, giving people through your being authoritative in the way that you're in that room. And I think that's a trainable skill. I think when you are the way that you say the words that are coming out of your mouth, does it always sound like a question? Or are we maybe raise your arms to the sky? Like that, like little things like that. The body presence, where you're standing, those are all things that could be easily taught if people, if we want to pay attention to the pedagogy of that, which I think we should. Yeah.
That okay. Let's I want to pull on this thread of a couple pieces of language here, because there are two words that I think we use a lot and mean particular things in people's brains, but we might not necessarily be doing that here. Like the idea of performance or being performative. Immediately,
Okay.
especially in yoga brains, that means you're not being real or you're not being authentic. And authenticity is this other word that I think is really freaking complicated, because we tell people we have to be our authentic selves all the time. But like, look, my authentic self when you and I are talking is very different than my authentic self when I'm talking to my 10-year-old daughter. So
Right.
we act like we have to be the same thing in every space.
Right.
Go, because I know you have
Okay.
stuff to say.
Okay. So, and thank you for that clarification, because I also want to say for our listeners, like I I haven't lived in an English speaking country for 15, 16, 17 years now. So sometimes my word choice is not exactly correct. So yes, I mean the aspect of performance in a room, not that we would be doing something
Fake.
performative. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, nothing fake, nothing
Yeah.
fake in there. So authenticity is for me showing up and doing the thing. So like authentic me when I'm on stage as a dancer, or on like air quote stage as a Pilates teacher, is different than when I'm authentically talking to you on a podcast or having a conversation, over a glass of tea. Actually, I think this would be exactly the same.
Yeah, it probably would be. I've got my tea right here.
um, but I think there's a way that we lean into, and it is subtle, right? It's hard to explain. It's like a way that we lean into who we are and feel confident in that first, and then that becomes the authentic part of it. Does that make sense?
It does, because I think that that needs to be said. This, because authentic is a word that we throw around like, you know, oh, that didn't feel authentic to me, when really what you're telling me is that you feel scared. And that's
Yes.
not like I feel like some of our language gets muddled, and social media I think has a part to play with it, but also I just think we're not skillful enough at putting words at what we think. Like, oh, I don't want to
Yes.
start this new thing that I'm doing. It just doesn't feel aligned or authentic with me. And what I hear when somebody says that is, oh, you're scared. I'm like, great, be scared. Just do it. Like, do it
Yeah.
scared. And that has nothing to do with necessarily if you're showing up as an authentic teacher or your authentic self. Like those two things,
Right.
we get that conflated, I think.
I totally agree with you. And I think also the idea of, being authentic, somehow for some people it means that they're not going to get nervous sometimes too. And like when I'm teaching a big event or whatever, I am nervous. I'm excited. And I think that excitement and nerves are very close together. But the it even when I'm showing up as me and my experience and all these things, and I'm a confident woman, doesn't mean that I'm also not nervous in there, because I care about it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, I still get nervous sometimes. I mean, somebody the other day was like, "How many yoga classes do you think you've taught over the years?" And I was like, "I don't know, but I'm pretty sure I'm at my 10 to 15,000 mark." Like a lot. Like I could walk
Yeah.
in a room at any point and somebody would just point to me and be like, "Teach." I'd be like, "Okay."
Yeah.
But there are for sure situations that you show up in that feel new or different, or the stakes feel higher and you feel nerves. That doesn't mean you're
Right.
not authentic. It doesn't mean it's not aligned with what you're doing. You just feel
Yeah.
nervous. Like, yeah,
Right.
you're right.
And it also, it doesn't mean that you're like that we have to also like put the imposter on it. Like it's like we can normalize, like, yes, it is so normal to be nervous and an experience and a new experience. And this is also part of that like teaching curve that we have to go through. It is flippin' scary the first few times or your 100th time or your 10 hundredth time of like sometimes it just gets a little scary for whatever reason. Maybe you didn't sleep well that day. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that go into it, and I think that the maybe a key is in those teacher training programs is like, what do you do when you're nervous? Whatever, like I have to take a couple big breaths, really concentrating on the exhale, and I need to feel my feet on the ground. Like that will get me centered enough to be able to think about the next thing I'm going to do. Because if not, I know from experience, my habit will be to ramble on into the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But those are types of skills that I think belong in a teacher training program, right? That's the pedagogy part of it.
Yes, and we don't have that requirement. I think
Right.
most, whether it's yoga or Pilates or any other fitness modality, to be honest with you, we don't have the requirement to teach that. And
Yeah.
maybe we don't, I mean, in yoga, we only have 200 hours. So we maybe don't even have the time, frankly, to teach that either.
Yeah.
How do we do? So I have two questions for you. One, how do we support the people who have already been trained because they need a skill set they weren't trained in? And
Right.
two, how important, where do we put this in our new teacher trainers? Like, is this right at the beginning of a 200-hour training? Do we wait for them to train and this is continuing ed? Like, what are your thoughts?
Great question. I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways to do it, right? So I will put out a couple of suggestions, and I think I think if people are listening to your podcast or my podcast, they are teachers that are interested in this type of continuing education. So they are the ones that realize, hey, there's a little bit of a gap that I'm trying to get through, whether it be business wise or teaching wise. So they're already doing that sort of work. And there's always a way to go deeper with that by finding a mentor, finding a program like ours or whatever. There's a lot of different ways to get eyes on your teaching to see where are the blind spots that you might want to go a little bit further in, uncover. So that's one thing that's for maybe a teacher that's already been through their formation, and it takes a little bit of, I would say, self-awareness to understand maybe where those problems lie, like where am I feeling the most uncomfortable, and then seeking out the teacher that can help fill that gap. But I think in other teacher training programs, what I would say is it has to happen at the beginning and then sprinkled in at the all throughout. Like when we're doing teacher training, they are teaching from the first day. Like you're going to learn an exercise and we're going to practice talking it through. We're going to practice standing. We're going to practice how we're using our words. How are we communicating whatever that is? Because that is the skill. Like I could teach you a whole bunch of different cool moves that are awesome for the gram, but that's not the teaching part, right? The
Yeah.
teaching part is like, how do you get it out of your brain into someone else's body? And that has to be from the very beginning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ooh. That is the question. How do you get it out of your brain and into somebody else's body?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do we do that?
Yeah.
I mean, because let's talk about the language of what happens, because each of us is different, right? So how you
Right.
teach is different. Some people I know are very prepared when they teach. I'm pretty much just running on vibes at this point, like
Yeah.
vibes in a room and an idea of what I want to talk about. So I come in with an idea, and my ideas no longer are concrete. Like it used to be, my idea would be move your shoulders. Now my idea is, can we talk about the difference between discomfort and suffering? And can
Right.
I teach an asana class about that?
Yeah. Yeah.
But how do you think that happens? I
How
don't
do
know that I know how it happens. It just
well
happens.
well, I think the hard part is for us OGs to go, to sort of back up all those steps, right? Because it hasn't always been like that for us. Like we're a couple decades
Yes.
into this, and those are skills like uh, you and I can walk in, like I feel the same way. You want me to teach whatever? Okay, like I don't even need to do anything. It's just a flip of a switch and I know what I'm doing, but it's also tens of thousands of hours of practice that went into it. So it's not that we should, I think you have to earn that right of ease through the
Yeah.
experience of doing it quite a lot. And then of course there's the tools. And I think we've been honing those tools for a really long time. And those are the tools I say of looking, listening with our ears, but listening also with our eyes, of getting that feedback of what's happening in front of us. The tools of structure. I mean, you and I could do it on the fly right now and have a well-rounded practice by the end of it. But it's because we're looking um, in the moment at many different factors, like have we done forward bends and side twists and all that.
Yeah.
All that stuff is just it's automatically being checklists in our brains. So we don't. I wouldn't recommend. I know you would do the same thing to a newbie teacher, just go out and it'll happen. No, it's because
Yeah.
these things are ticking off in our brains. Like, have I fulfilled this and this and this and this? And then bring them to an end that they feel, satisfied and safe at the end of it. Um, so I think the question that you asked me is that what are the checklists that are automatically happening also, right?
Yeah. What are
Um,
they? I mean, I mean, like you've articulated that really well, and you're right. There is this. Maybe this is part of the trouble, right? In our training, is that people like you and I are have been in this long enough that we're training other people, but a lot of what we do is so automatic that almost I haven't really thought about it in forever. Like I said, I come into a room and I go, okay, so I know what I'm going to talk about today. And you said imposter syndrome. Somebody the other day said, will you talk about imposter syndrome while you're teaching? I was like, yeah, of course. Like, and we just did this whole class about it. But I also come in knowing how I want people to feel at the end. So I
right.
start teaching the first minute, knowing where they're going to be the last minute, how I want them to feel the last minute. And you just build a thing to get somebody there.
Right.
But it's so automatic. You're right.
It's, and I think part of this, at least in at least in what I've seen, is a part of what we do as performers is that, right? Like we create an atmosphere in the room and we're understanding of the theatrical aspect of it because I know any good story is going to have a beginning, middle, and end. And how do I get
Yeah.
them to that last thing? And I definitely always know how I'm going to be ending. And I am very much the same as I know my last feeling of what I want them, like what's my last journey point. So there's that part of it, but that's too, I think, esoteric when we're training other people. Like we could say that, but that doesn't make sense. So I would, you know what I mean? Or
Yes. Yes.
okay, okay. So it's a bit too esoteric. So So the way that we do that is, I think, having backing up our checklist is saying, okay, if you want someone to feel like this at the end, here are some structures of movement that might get you there. Practice teaching a few times in this structure to see if you could build it to there. So that it could be like an organization of asanas. It could be if I'm teaching a HIIT class and I know that I need to get them really tired, like we have a
Yeah.
beginning, middle, and end right there. So I think it's similar when we're talking about what the body needs to go through to get to that end result. So there's the structure part of it. We can, as far as checklists go, talk about the type of cueing that we use as well. And that might depend on the atmosphere of the end that we want. Maybe it's going to be a very metaphorical class. Maybe, because if we're going to talk about
Yeah.
it, imposter syndrome, like the brain has to jump from like, okay, but I'm just doing a twist here. How am I
Yeah.
talking about,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but like we have to help them bridge that gap. And that's going to be through the words that we're choosing as well. Not,
So there's this book. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It's by Twyla Tharp, and it is her book on creativity. Have you ever read it?
I love her and I love that book. Yes.
Oh my God. So, like, so influential in my thinking, right? This idea that she always says, if you're going to think outside the box, you have to build the box first.
Yes.
And so that is one of the things that I think sometimes, I'm just going to speak for myself, but I think in general, we're skipping over building the box for new teachers and
Yeah.
just telling them to think outside this box. And they're like, what box? Like, you haven't
Yeah.
given me any structure to think outside of. I have to figure out how this box works first.
Yeah. Yes. I agree. I agree. There has to be enough, yeah, you have to build the box. So then it's the, what's the box going to be made of? What's the color of the box? How big is the box? What is the lid going to look like? Does it have a
Yeah.
lid? Is it a rectangular box? So like
Yeah.
all of
All the
those
things.
things,
Yeah.
all of those things have to then be decided on. And I think that is part of the teacher training thing. And then it's also, if we're going to use this metaphor, it's also going to be the point of the teacher, the person that's leaving the teacher training is to say, okay, now this is what my box is going to look like. This is the way that I'm going to teach, and these are the things that are important to me. And it's held within this container. And I can feel free to put other things in there or take things out as they serve me. But what we don't want to do is have all of those boxes, let's say, to be completely the same. It's a starting off point.
Yeah. Ooh, that's nice. So there has to be some similar foundational elements, right? So we all have to
Absolutely.
know, which I think is also a problem. Like we don't have even the same foundation. Like
Yeah.
some people's boxes are glass and other people's boxes are cardboard and other people's boxes are made of like banana pudding. There's just like there we should have some sort of agreement
Yeah.
that all of our boxes are banana pudding. And then going, don't you think? I mean, there just has to be something that's
There has to be,
universal.
right, right. And I think that's really, it shouldn't be as hard as it is. And I'm going to tell you why I think
Yes.
that there's a problem is that we're running against um traditions. We are running against faulty belief systems as well. We're running against pseudoscience. We are so there's a lot of issues. So to decide on, okay, is this box that we all are going to be working within, is it going to be evidence-based? Is it going to be based on, and in yoga, you have a lot of more different things to choose from, right?
Yeah.
Because yoga is not just asana. So we have like all of, okay, what is the human body? What's that capable of doing? Then we have all of the different philosophy that comes into it. And, it's a bigger space, say,
Yeah.
than like Pilates. We have a different type of issue. We've got a lot more um we have a lot more equipment, like we got
Yes, you
big
do.
fancy, big fancy expensive equipment, and a lot of exercises. And then in there, a lot of different creativity and things. Um, and we run up against also the traditionalists, the classical Pilates police, we like to call them. So there's traditional Pilates, which is not the Pilates police, but then we have the Pilates police that are end all like my guru is Joseph Pilates, and anything that wasn't the way he did it, but who the heck knows what he did or not? That's a whole nother story. Anything other than that, we can't teach. So we have the same exact problem in the Pilates world. And that is very, very hard. So who's going to be the person that says, is the box out of banana pudding or is it out of steel? And I don't know, like there has to be a consensus somewhere.
Yeah. So in the Pilates universe, do you have an organization that should be, because yoga has an organization that should be building that box for us. They should at the very least be mailing us all cardboard. And they're like, however you want to put your box together, you've all got cardboard. But they're not. Well, womp womps, like sad trombone sound. Does Pilates
Yeah.
have that person or group?
We got similar issues. We
So,
got
so no.
real similar issues. Because it's not a certifying body. It's a trade. I don't even know what you would say. It's like you could pay anything and you could be part of this, and then you have your as as far as this is to my knowledge. So you pay, you get your teacher training certified. I don't even know if they look at the stuff, and then they're not tested, and those teachers that come out of it are not tested as well. So what sort of
Same.
standards are we? But it's not just like that. There's also in the dance world the same, and it's I think there's a bigger problem it's a movement issue, right? Like, which is weird.
Ooh. Yeah. Which I feel like is an interesting comment because a lot of us who found our way into movement, into yoga, Pilates, dance, other things, is because we didn't fit in other places. And somehow we've all found our people here.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I'm going to speak for myself, but also you and I know each other, so I'm going to speak for you. You could do anything, babe. I would hire you in a minute to have like you're very talented and skilled and have a lot of marketable skills. But here we are doing this thing because we found our communities in this world. But
Yeah.
it's so messy here. Like,
Yeah.
is do you feel like there's space for groups of people to stand up and say, hey, we need to really do something to sort of where all of our boxes are out of, palm fronds? Like,
Yeah. I mean, I think there's space for it. I don't think everyone's going to be happy about it.
nobody's happy now anyway.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So it's the same.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I want to say yes, but I'm not sure. Like I'm over here on my little Pilates corner, kicking and screaming about some of the issues that I see in it. And um in the DMs, there's a lot of people like, yes, this is what we've been talking about, but they're in, it's still quiet. There's a
Yeah.
little rumble. I feel like it needs to get bigger, at least in my little corner, before real change starts to happen. Now, this Pilates side of it is very small in comparison to the yoga side of things. So you guys got many, many, many. I don't know how many yoga teachers there are, for example, in the United States, but there's a lot of you guys. Um,
Tons.
a lot of yoga studios and stuff. And so it's got to be um what's the pain point of change? Like what's going to be putting the last camel on the straw? No, it's the other way.
Ooh, so the pain point, because also I feel like one of the things that's similar about us is that I think there has to be, and yoga people are going to hate me for saying this, and yeah, fine. But it's true. The pain point has to be the fact we accept we don't make enough money. And in order for us to make more money, there has to be a consensus that we professionalize what we're doing. Professionalization, whether you like it or not, means all of our boxes are cardboard. Like,
Yeah.
and your box can be square and my box can be oval, and we can, take scissors and glue the sides and whatever, but the boxes have to be made of the same thing for
Right.
us all. Like, not all dentists are dentisting in the same way. I'm sure they have different methodologies, but they all know that they're cleaning teeth.
Right, right. Yes. Yeah, I agree with you because there's plenty of opportunity to niche out and do different things within the yoga world and the Pilates and all
Yeah.
of that. But um the educational basis is hard to, yeah, it's going to be hard. It's going to be really interesting to have to find that because if it is there, then there is the potential to make more money from it, right? Because what's sad is that yoga teacher training ain't cheap. Same thing with Pilates
Yeah.
um, and I don't know how many years in some cases it takes for people to make that money back as a yoga teacher, which is really awful.
I mean, I could do, the math of it. If you're able to get two classes a week where you make $50 per class, which is great pay, higher pay than most yoga teachers make. If you paid $2,500 for that, you'd, what is it, 250, what, 25 weeks, 250 weeks? Do that math
Um,
for me, Hannah.
oh, I don't do math. 5, 6, 7, 8. That's what I got.
Yeah, so I mean, it takes 25 weeks, but that means that you don't put that money anywhere else but making your money back. You've made $50 a class.
Yeah.
So making $50 a class also often requires you to have 10 years of experience doing the job.
Right. Right.
Let me ask you this,
Sure.
because this is something that I also see in the yoga space. I've talked about it many times on this podcast. Do Pilates teachers feel like they have a real job?
Oh, that's a funny question.
Yoga teachers don't. Yoga therapists a little bit, but yoga teachers, I think on the whole, feel like they don't have a real job.
I I mean, I certainly do. I
Same.
there's a lot of yes, I think so, especially the people that teach with the equipment, because usually that is it's a longer, more intensive training also. So when you leave the bare minimum of hours and you've learned the entire studio equipment, you're at 600 hours, but usually it's a little bit higher than that. So 600, 750. Like I think just in Pilates training, I have like 1,200, something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I think the amount of time that you spend honing the craft makes you also take it, it levels you up and you feel like, okay, yeah, well, this is my profession now.
Yeah, I think that's the same for yoga therapy. So yoga therapy, I mean, the base level is 850 hours, and then I mean, I think I'm at like 15 or 1600 hours at this point.
Yeah.
But so then it's very clearly a real job, but that's also cost me, what, $7,000 to $10,000 worth of training to get there. So it better be
Right,
a real job at that
right.
point. But 200 hours for $2,500, I
Yeah,
mean, that's like waitress level training, kind of, you know?
yeah, yeah. And then and like I said, I don't often have answers, but I have lots of questions, so I'm
Yeah,
good at that.
yeah.
But like do we need to take it and like take apart the profession and say, okay, well, now you're going to go to, is this a university level profession?
Yeah.
You know, I don't, or is it a college class? And what is it like? What is the standard going to be so that people have the information that they must have in order to teach for some it's just safe, but like safe and
Yeah.
financially, lucrative and a good entertaining class if you want entertainment. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and to play devil's advocate for the whole thing, also, I think if your entire goal is to teach yoga at a Planet Fitness or a chain gym, and you're going to teach yoga at a gym a couple hours a week in exchange for your free gym membership or whatever other perks you might be getting, I think 200 is fine. I think 200 hours is fine for that job. It's not really that hard of a job, which I say over and over again. And then I always get emails where they're like, that's not nice to say. Like, it's not that hard though. like,
I mean, it's not brain surgery.
no, it's not. But
Yeah.
we don't have emergencies. You've never had a yoga emergency. You might have thought you had a yoga emergency. You didn't. It's not.
Yeah.
You're fine. They were fine. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And in that scenario, I think 200 hours is just fine. You come in, you learn 200 hours, you learn 30, 40 postures, you learn the fundamentals of movement science, the basics of how to run a room of people. Okay.
Yeah.
But then the argument becomes, is that yoga?
Right. And we deal with the same thing is like, is that Pilates? And and then we have to define what that is. And that gets really tricky, like
Yes.
it gets really tricky because like we will get into it on this podcast, but there was a lawsuit about the definition of Pilates because it was trying to be trademarked or none, and that was a few years ago. So it's really interesting question of what is Pilates. But I think that yoga has also those issues. Like, was there,
Yes.
What is codified? What is the brand? Like, is this can you patent a certain sequence or trademark a certain sequence of exercises? Yeah, it's super interesting. And I think there is no easy answer.
No, but we also seem to be unwilling to tackle the question, which I feel like is a true problem. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
is the Pilates world tackling the question at all? Because the yoga world is not. We're just avoiding it and being assholes.
We're we're trying to, but it's really interesting. It's very volatile in our area, about what's true Pilates and what's not. And well, it has to look like this, but then that's such like ableist, very ableist language that we have. Also not, yeah. I got issues all the way around with some of the current definitions of what Pilates is. And I would assume it's the same in yoga because like who's to say, there's more layers to a yoga practice. So someone that's sitting in a chair in the yoga room, eyes closed, meditating, they're still doing yoga.
Yeah.
Like that is part of yoga. So are they not doing yoga because they've been sitting in the chair? If it's a lotus, if they're sitting in lotus or on the chair, well, can't get in lotus. So now we're going to say, like this person isn't doing the thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think it's just super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And what becomes tricky because, Hannah, we're in it. Because what really becomes tricky is this idea that the minute this conversation comes up with anybody, and man, I have asked a lot of really smart people about these questions, and the answer is always, but who defines yoga, man? And I'm just like, well, someone should. Like, at some point, if you jump in the pool, that's not yoga, you're swimming. We have to be able to say, like,
Right.
what is and what isn't.
Yeah. And we got the same thing. It's like, where is the line of like, okay, what is just calisthenics and what is Pilates? If it looks like, and when we're in the vein of thinking like I am, where the method has to be accessible. So that means that it must look different on different bodies. So I need to make room in that definition for the Pilates exercises to look different, which then means that it's not looking like the historical pictures and videos that we have of what Joseph Pilates originally did. Then we open up a whole big can of worms of like, well, then it's
Yeah.
so that definition needs to broaden out, though, in my opinion, because we cannot just be putting ourselves in this tiny little corner of what it is or isn't, because it's elitist, it's ableist, my opinion.
Yes.
Um, and I do think it's the same thing with yoga. And you're right, like swimming is swimming. Yoga is
Yes.
yoga. But what is it? What is the essence of that? I don't know.
Yeah, because no one wants to say, I think is what I have found is that no one wants to say. And we in the States we have this organization, the Yoga Alliance, who really should be saying, because they're a literal registered trade organization. So if anybody should know, it should be them. Like there should be unquestionably, I should be able to email them and be like, yo, what's yoga? And they should be able to give me an answer. But I know they wouldn't. It would just be the runaround of like it's vibes and history
Yeah.
and with like plastic mats. Okay.
Yeah.
But to the degree to which we can't define what we do is also the degree to which we will struggle to be able to be a real profession, because dentists aren't like, well, if I scrub your elbow, I'm also cleaning your teeth. Like there's no
Right.
question. They get where their scope is, they get what they're talking about. For some reason, like we don't. Like movement people, we seem to really struggle with this.
Well, yeah, and yes. And like in the yoga world, are we going to define it by, okay, these are the 8 limbs that we're going to go by, and you could practice any one of them alone, or do you have to have two of them going on at the same time?
Right.
Like like what is it? And you're absolutely right. Until we can define it, we can't be taken serious as a profession, and we also are going to have a hard time in a teacher training. Like, what is it you are teaching?
Yes.
Because if we cannot put some parameters on that, or at least then what am I preparing you for?
Yeah, that becomes one of the reasons why I've always sort of fought this idea of being a teacher trainer myself, partially
Mhm.
because I feel like eventually, and we aren't there yet as an industry, but eventually the studios and the teacher training programs need to be separate. If you're a teacher trainer, that should be what you're called to do. You're called to be
Yeah.
a person who trains people. If you're a business owner slash studio owner slash community builder, then that's what you're called to do. That's what you do. Those two things don't need to be in the same space. Like I feel like those of us who run the businesses are wearing too many hats anyway. Like be good at business, somebody else be good at training. That being said, I think one of the challenges that I've always had with training is I understand that somebody who pays me for a 200-hour teacher training expects to come out of that knowing 30 or 40 postures, having basic language of how to teach those postures. And I don't care about that. And at this point, that's not what I'm interested in and what I'm doing. I'm working with deeper philosophy, I'm working with different things. And so that becomes like this tension, right? Of there's an expectation of what you come out with, which is just you're an asana teacher, a movement teacher, and then what yoga is.
Right.
You know, and I don't know how to offset that tension, so I'm just asking people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really fascinating and interesting discussion, like, um, or so I'm just going to go into it a totally different way of you mentioned a really interesting idea of like, okay, you have the studio and then we have teacher training institutes and they could be separate. And I think that is a wonderful model. Like, I think that could be super
Yeah.
interesting. Because then you just concentrate uh, on the act of teaching.
Yeah.
What if we say totally different that the studios themselves train every single person as if they would be the yoga teacher,
Mm.
so that the yoga teacher, the Pilates teacher, this is a little bit more of like what our philosophy is that any person that comes into our studio, we want them to have the skills to like, I'm sure that you're doing this unconsciously anyways, but like, to the skills that they understand their bodies in a way that is that they could really make wise decisions about that, about the authenticity of the way that they're doing their movement practice would be the same way that they would teach it anyways. The depth of science that we go in and anatomy is going to be what they would do anyways in a teacher training. So we really teach our classes. So we say any one of you can be a teacher, Pilates trainer at some point if you want to.
So you're teaching your students that way, that
I'm
they
teaching my
can.
students that way. So I'm saying that um I'm sort of like just saying that it might not be that we have to completely separate
Yeah.
the two things. And I mean, and the reason why I would say that, no, I still think that there needs to be oversight, but in the dance world, most of, like I would say 95% of the time, you graduate from, say you've been dancing your whole life, you don't go to a separate school to learn how to teach. You just start teaching. Why? Because they've
Uh,
taught you so well how to do that movement that you know. Now, I do see there's exceptions to this rule, so
yeah.
but yeah,
I mean,
just an interesting thing.
in yoga, I think that's how it used to be. I mean, the stories that you hear of people in the 90s, I mean, and I was practicing in the 90s, and yeah, the same is that you would just be practicing, and then like eventually your teacher would need a day off. Like they were like gonna go to Bali or wherever, and they'd be like, hey, I need you to come sub this class. And you're like, what? Oh,
That I'm
yeah.
I'm that is exactly how I started. That is 100% how I started. That's how I started teaching dance, and that's also how I started really teaching yoga. Was that my teacher at that point was like, "Okay, you're ready to teach. Go try it." And I tell you, it was really flippin' scary, but I was so well prepared. I really was a little bit cookie cutter, but I felt really strong in what I was doing. Maybe I was just too young and dumb. That could be,
Yeah.
like maybe I was
Yeah.
just like, I overestimated my thing, but I don't know if the class was any good, but I felt good doing it.
Yeah.
Um, but it is definitely a shift in the way the industry has been, because I think that all yoga was like that before, right? Like you just got tapped on
Yes.
the shoulder and said, okay, you're ready to teach now. Where at some point we were like, oh, we can make money from this, so we're gonna we're gonna
Yeah.
take it, dial it down. Like it was probably after, ooh, I want to say it was like 2 years of constant training with my teacher, like every day, 2 classes a day, where he was like, okay, you're ready to teach. So have we watered it down with the teacher training? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so I just did the math really quick because I mean that becomes like we generate so much money in trainings collectively speaking. I mean, assume worldwide 10,000 people train to be a yoga teacher every year. That actually seems like a fairly low number. I bet it's more people, assume most towns that are running teacher trainings have 10 to 15 people in them, et cetera, et cetera. That's $25 million a year we generate in revenue for teacher trainings alone. I mean, so now we're an industry. Now that's a business. The training side of it is so much money.
Yeah.
Could we ever go back there?
Yeah, great question. God, I have more questions than I have answers in this podcast. Sorry.
Don't apologize, because like I feel like it's worth us just asking those questions, because I'm sure there are other people out there who've been thinking about them, but it's validating for me to know there are other people thinking about it. But also, I mean, I don't have the answers either, but I feel like if we have more discussions, that's how we unearth how this gets better. This has to
Yeah.
get better for us.
Yeah.
We have to be able to say, look, in some way, we're creating a profession that we all are excited to be a part of, that has integrity and that is authentic, and we are making the world a better place. I feel like we're doing that now, but it's mostly by accident. And I feel like maybe we should do it on purpose.
Yes.
like truly, I feel like we're just we're just the luckiest industry, people stumbling along like it'll be great.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true.
Okay, so before we end, give me one piece of wisdom for those who are listening who are also training other teachers. Are you a teacher trainer? Because Hannah is an expert teacher trainer. What would you say to those people? How to give them advice and hope? Give them hope, Hannah. We need hope.
All right. Gosh, that's hard. Because where do we start? I think as a teacher trainer, teaching people teaching potential teachers how to trust the decisions that they're making is one of the greatest skill sets that we can give them when they're teaching their classes. Does that make sense?
That's a damn good answer. Wow. Well done.
Oof, okay.
Hannah, tell everybody how to find you.
You can find me on the Pilates Exchange podcast, or give Rebecca some places to find me on Instagram at Performance Fit Pilates is also a great place.
Awesome. Thank you for coming and having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hannah, for coming on the podcast. Here are our key takeaways. First, teacher training can be a good source of revenue, yes, but to all those out there who think that yoga studios train in order to keep their doors open, I have news for you. In large part, we don't. The hourly wage that most of us make training versus working on other things in or on our businesses is not what folks perceive it to be. Next, lots of businesses train because they need workers. This leads me to a primary question that I want to answer in this series, or at least explore. What does it take for us to level up our expectations of yoga teacher trainings? And how should trainings work in general? Essentially, as I say in the podcast, we need to build a box so we can think outside of it. How do we up-level the industry training standards in such a way that only the people who are truly invested in training new yoga teachers and feel called to serve the industry in that way sign up for shepherding the next generation of yoga teachers into our profession? Next, here's that word again, pedagogy. How do we teach people how to command a room? That's a good question, huh? How do you command a room yourself when you're teaching? Is that a teachable skill? Next, we create an atmosphere in a room when we teach. As Hannah said, every good story has a beginning, middle, and end. And that is how most of us structure our classes, whether we know it or not. But for those who are new to teaching, we do need to build some kind of structure that others can follow within how we teach. So what's your structure? How do you think about teaching a yoga class? Is that something somebody else taught you, or something that you've kind of made up on your own? And finally, Oh my gosh, it isn't just us. I don't know why, but I found it very comforting that we are not the only movement modality that struggles with professionalization and standards. There's something more to this thought process, but I would be curious what you think. Why do you think movement modalities in particular struggle with this? As I said, dentists aren't out there questioning their scope of practice. They get that their gig is teeth. Why do we struggle in this way? So up next week is my first solo episode in the series on teacher trainings. I'm exploring what teacher training means to me, where I hope to see the industry go, and where I feel like we can find some guidance. Until we get break time again, my friends, please take care, and I will see you around the water cooler next time.